Trump's brain is broken, badly damaged, as he exhibits every day. And once again today, Donald Trump said something that would have gotten any other president rushed to the hospital for a neurological examination and an evaluation for dementia, for starters. That's where they would have begun. It was a vile, anti-Semitic outburst by the man who once said this after he saw a black accountant working at one of his failed casinos. Quote, "Black guys counting my money. I hate it. The only kind of people I want counting my money are short guys that wear yarmulkes every day. Those are the kind of people I want counting my money. No one else." That is how the anti-Semitic president of the United States sees Jewish men.
But also there is a big problem of calling every Republican a racist and calling everything racism. That goes on the left. You know, I mean, we were talking about on the show.
You're saying it's both sides, isn't it?
Well,
there is no doubt.
There's no misinformation.
There's some disinformation from the left, but comparing it to what Donald Trump spews out every day, every week, comparing it to what Elon Musk is spewing out, unfortunately, on X, there's no...
You were like, Bill, how can you, Mr. False Equivalency? It's like, no, Joe, come on. I thought you were Joe Scarborough. There's crazy on both sides.
There's crazy on both sides.
Not as much on the left at all, but, you know, I don't pause at calling it out.
But they're elected to represent us. They're going to follow what the people do. And so we have to show them what needs doing.
Bill Maher, known for his no-nonsense take on politics, just took aim at MSNBC's relentless anti-Trump coverage. While he's never been a fan of Donald Trump, Maher refuses to buy into the idea that everything associated with Trump must be inherently bad.
But I will tell you that, like, there's never been anybody who's had the difficulty of that situation, elevated that late in the campaign. Why?
Needed to run away from
Bill, I don't know if you know this, but the vice president of the United States is basically shoved in a broom closet for 3.5 years.
I know.
Like, you couldn't.
She was more popular in there.
Yes, well.
I mean, this idea that in a mass media age, that 107 days is not long enough to know somebody?
You are way overestimating the American people in terms of what their ability.
No.
I'm not going to pre-hate everything. That's just my thing with Trump. I'm not going to be one of those people who thinks he's wrong just because he's him. This statement alone sent shockwaves across the political spectrum. A liberal comedian defending the idea that not everything Trump did was a catastrophe, that's enough to get people talking.
On CNBC yesterday, the normally mild-mannered, very pro-business Steve Leisman used a word I've never heard him use before in his analysis of the economy or the stock market or anything else. It was the word insane, and he applied it to Donald Trump.
I'm going to say this at risk of my job, Kelly, but what President Trump is doing is insane. It is absolutely insane. It is about the 8th reason we've had for the tariffs. And now he's saying he's putting 50% tariffs on Canada unless they agree to become the 51st state. That is insane. There is just no other way of describing it.
That's enough for Donald Trump.
But Maher didn't stop there. He went head-to-head with an MSNBC host and calmly dismantled the anti-Trump echo chamber. What exactly did Maher say? And why is his stance causing so much controversy? Let's break it all down.
It doesn't seem like those scare tactics are working. I would hazard they only make people want to protest more. Today, hundreds of veterans and their family members and loved ones rallied near Capitol Hill in protest of Musk's cuts to the federal government, many of which target veterans who worked at the government and have been fired or are serviced by the government directly.
Ken Martin guy, he said something I've heard Democrats say a lot. We didn't get our message out. Maybe I'm paraphrasing, but that's it. And I've said this before to Democrats. No, you did. That's the problem.
Yeah.
You did get your message out, and people don't like the message.
But it was Axios that they gave the new media seat to, and that is to Mike Allen, who is like an established reporter in Washington. Axios has been around for like 5 years, sold for $500 million. I don't really consider it new media, and I thought it was interesting that that was their first new media.
It is new media because old media sells for $1.
That is true.
Bill Maher has built a career on his outspoken political commentary, often skewering both conservatives and liberals alike. However, despite his progressive leanings, he has consistently criticized the left's refusal to entertain opposing viewpoints. For years, MSNBC has crafted a brand centered around strong anti-Trump rhetoric, labeling him as a dire threat to democracy. This messaging has resonated with many, especially those who view Trump as an authoritarian figure. But Maher, ever the contrarian, took a different stance. He argued that while Trump deserved scrutiny, the media's refusal to acknowledge any of his successes only made them look biased and out of touch. His latest confrontation with an MSNBC host underscores a deeper issue. Is the mainstream media hurting itself by refusing to offer a balanced perspective?
For weeks now, we have seen protest after protest all across the country as Americans have pushed back against this strategy.
You haven't changed, so you consider yourself a liberal, right?
I consider myself an old school liberal. You have to make that distinction now because, you know, the word woke, which started out as a good thing, being alert to injustice, and a lot of people get triggered by the word because when they hear it, they think of it the old meaning, which was good.
Right.
You know, stay woke.
It's no secret that MSNBC has positioned itself as one of the most outspoken critics of Donald Trump. Since his entry into politics, the network has dedicated countless hours to dissecting his every word, action, and tweet. Critics argue that this relentless focus has resulted in coverage that is more emotional than factual, creating an environment where everything Trump does is framed as a crisis, even when similar actions by other politicians go unnoticed. During the exchange with Maher, the MSNBC host doubled down on these familiar talking points, arguing that Trump's presidency was an unmitigated disaster, that his economic policies were nothing but a sham, and that his influence remains a clear and present danger to democracy. But Maher wasn't buying it. Instead of falling in line with the outrage machine, he challenged the host's insistence that nothing about Trump's presidency had any merit. Rather than parroting left-wing media's narrative, Maher took a step back and called for a more balanced perspective. His argument was simple. Blind hatred for Trump is just as irrational as blind loyalty. Look, I didn't vote for him. I won't vote for him. But let's be real. Was everything he did a catastrophe? And pretending otherwise just makes the media look out of touch. Maher pointed out that the media's obsession with Trump has only helped him maintain his influence. By making him the center of every discussion, they've inadvertently fueled the very political movement they oppose. His warning was clear. MSNBC and similar networks risked undermining their own credibility by refusing to acknowledge any nuance in their coverage. While Maher made it clear that he opposes Trump politically, he also recognized that portraying everything he does as evil weakens journalism as a whole. You guys don't realize that when you make him the center of everything, you're just feeding into his narrative. You think you're hurting him, but all you're doing is making him more powerful. At this point, the MSNBC host started to scramble, attempting to steer the conversation back to the familiar script of Trump being a political and moral catastrophe. But Maher wasn't letting go.
Are you planning to lower corporate taxes to match Ireland?
Well, we are planning to lower taxes, yeah, if the Democrats behave, but the Democrats have no clue.
Are you planning to lower corporate taxes like Ireland? There's Donald Trump sitting in the Oval Office today with the head of the Irish government, asked a question about corporate taxes in Ireland and the United States, which then got him rambling on for a few completely irrelevant paragraphs that could never be called an answer.
The most striking moment of the discussion came when Maher dropped a truth bomb that left the MSNBC host visibly stunned. It's not that everything Trump did was bad, it's that you've decided everything he did was bad before even looking at it. This was the moment that shifted the conversation. For a brief second, the MSNBC host seemed at a loss for words. The idea that Trump's policies, some of which had real, tangible benefits, should be judged on merit rather than just partisan hatred was something they weren't prepared to debate. Maher had exposed an uncomfortable truth. Bias isn't just about what is reported, but also what is ignored. The left-wing media has, in many cases, refused to acknowledge any success under Trump, fearing that doing so would give him legitimacy. But, in Maher's view, this refusal to engage with reality only strengthens Trump's base by confirming their belief that mainstream media is out to get him, no matter what. Unsurprisingly, Maher's comments set off a firestorm online. On Twitter, reactions were mixed. Supporters praised Maher for his willingness to challenge media bias, with tweets like, "Finally, a liberal who isn't afraid to admit the truth about the media's obsession with Trump." Critics argued that Maher was normalizing Trump, with some saying, "This is how authoritarianism thrives, by pretending it's not as bad as it is." Meanwhile, YouTube and podcast discussions exploded with debate. Conservative commentators seized on Maher's words as evidence that even liberals were starting to acknowledge Trump's successes. Progressive voices, on the other hand, expressed concern that Maher was playing into the right's hands. Polling data also showed a small but noticeable decline in MSNBC's credibility rating among independents, a sign that Maher's criticism may have resonated beyond just his own audience. Since the debate, Maher has continued to double down on his critique of the left's handling of Trump coverage. In a recent podcast episode, he expanded on his point, arguing that the media needs to grow up and learn how to cover Trump objectively rather than emotionally. Meanwhile, MSNBC has found itself facing renewed criticism for its approach to political coverage. As the 2024 election cycle heats up, questions are being raised about whether their aggressive stance against Trump is effective or if it's actually driving more voters into his camp. The broader media landscape is also shifting. With declining viewership across major networks, more Americans are turning to alternative sources for their political news, suggesting that frustration with mainstream media bias is at an all-time high. Maher's remarks are just one part of a larger conversation happening across the country. How should the media cover Trump moving forward? And does blind opposition actually help or hurt his chances of making a political comeback? This isn't just about Trump. It's about how the media operates in a world where partisanship dominates everything. Maher's exchange with MSNBC highlights a critical issue. Journalism is supposed to inform, not just reinforce ideological echo chambers. When media outlets refuse to acknowledge facts that don't fit their narrative, they lose credibility with the people they're trying to reach. The bigger takeaway? Political bias exists on both sides, and being willing to challenge it, even within your own camp, is the only way to have real discussions. Now it's your turn. Do you agree with Maher that MSNBC's Trump coverage has gone too far, or do you think their criticism is completely justified? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more deep dives into media bias and political spin. Stay tuned, because this conversation is far from over.